future foreigners. It's us here at whoopwu Studios in wonderful Cyberpunk Chongqing. And today, I'm going to be talking with the Emily, also I think known as the navigator or the architect. What in your parlance would you decide as the creator of this universe? What would you call yourself? What do you feel comfortable in your own parlance?
Well, I don't know if I'm the creator so much as the interpreter. The ideas come to me and I give them to you.
Ooh, okay. So then let's start with what are these ideas? We're going to decide what you think are the definitions of three of our most important terms in this modern age. Let's start off with cyberpunk. What does cyberpunk mean to you? We're here in Chongqing, named the cyberpunk city of the world.
By Cyberpunk Magazine.
Cyberpunk Magazine 2021. They haven't updated this year yet, so
it's only February.
Yeah.
What are they going to publish every month?
What does it mean to you to live in the cyberpunk city?
Well, I guess first I'll talk about... Thank you for asking that question. I'm going to answer a different one.
Oh, good.
That cyberpunk as a genre is something I've always really enjoyed in my life. I read Neuromancer, Snow Crash, all of those early cyberpunk books. So I have credentials. And I guess what I like about them is there's the mix between technology and oppression and living conditions and trying to live a good life. But I think what amuses me about it is the failure of promise. I mean, because I think failure is funny, so that's where I like to explore. And so to me, these dystopian societies depicted in these books that I read in my formative years are very much about technology's promise to save us, but then it only makes life worse for the have-nots. In general.
So do you find oppression to be a humorous subject that you enjoy tackling in a satirical sense, or?
It's less noble than that, I guess. It's because I'm not for oppression, but I think it's not so much about the dynamic between the oppressed and the oppressors, but how people without advantages, without privilege, without power, keep on keeping on. Because, often it's very inventive and funny.
Cool.
Thanks.
So what within those themes, what drives you to write about them? What drives you to live in a system where you've got the high technology and the low living together as one force as we careen into the future?
Yeah, I don't feel like I chose to live a place for aesthetic purposes, although we did move to Chongqing for
it's pretty.
It's pretty. There's art here. There's kind of more interesting people and things going on. So for culture reasons, I guess, but not purely aesthetic. I kind of disagree that Chongqing is the cyberpunk city, but I think I've just been overruled by popular opinion. It's just a lot of cliffs with lights in buildings because we live in a modern world.
Would you say most modern cities look cyberpunk to you?
Maybe.
If you were a drone floating through the sky?
And I am.
A drone floating
But I guess one of the characteristics of being in cyberpunk is you wouldn't name your own existence a thing. Similarly to how musicians and artists and writers and filmmakers themselves all resist genre labels. Genre labels exist for marketing purposes, which is important because as a consumer of artistic work, that is often how I make my decisions.
So a knight wouldn't be walking around saying how much they love living in medieval
Yeah,
times.
they're like, what a chivalric life I'm living.
It doesn't actually work if you
Outside of Don Quixote.
If you work in a medieval times restaurant, you refer to yourself as.
I guess that's the commodification of the aesthetic. It's being packaged and sold. So if you work at medieval times. Actually, I could see a cyberpunk scenario where you work at a present times, but you're set in the future, so you're like emulating early 2000s life.
So
you go to work and you put on your cell phone holder and like you serve, I don't know, avocado toast.
If you were to open up a restaurant themed in Chongqing right now, would
90s.
you say 90s? You wouldn't go with cyberpunk as what the...
Well, if the argument is Chongqing is the cyberpunk city, you have to have a contrast, or like no one comes to normal the business, or maybe everybody goes to normal the business, and that's why I'm not a successful business person.
Yeah, well, you're always bucking the trend. So if the city is, we are cyberpunk, you're saying it's not, but.
I'm contrarian. Yes, I'm contrarian.
And that's why we're not a success.
Yeah.
Another aspect
we are too successful
of what you're interested in is, well, maybe let's not. We have the post-apocalyptics or the apocalyptics of now. What about the apocalypse do you really enjoy?
The apocalypse.
Apocalypti?
Well. My friend did an interview with John Hodgman many years ago in which John Hodgman wrote some kind of book about survival, and it was just about the time where The Walking Dead and all these kind of zombie shows came out. And so my friend
very popular
was into that and like wanted to like bond with John Hodgman by somehow, I guess it was related to the book, but like, so what do you think of this new trend of all these zombie shows? And clearly expecting the answer of like, I love zombies, it's so cool, genre fiction, blah blah blah. And John Hodgman was adamant that like apocalypse fiction is the realm of the immature because it just like you can't imagine change, so you just want to tear it all down. And maybe he's kind of right, because what's appealing to me about post-apocalypse is just like all the structures are gone and we start fresh, we start anew. Because something that I do find interesting, The Walking Dead actually addressed this, is in a lot of fiction set in a post-apocalyptic world, a lot of it is either recreating previous social norms or consciously not recreating those social norms and structures. Which I exist in this life just constantly questioning, like, why? Because I'm 2 years old.
And so is it the excitement of tearing something down, or is it the excitement of building something up, or is it the combination of the two?
I would say it's probably the latter more than the former. And more, I like The Walking Dead. We watched it until...
like most people, season
it went off the
something.
rails, and yeah, you just insert your own season for when that happened for you. But what actually I like is when it turns the apocalypse into an archetype, so that you can be like more clearly satirical about a certain aspect of life without having to like have a 500-page Bible for the world that you made. Like, I mean, I like hard fantasy that has, well, I don't like. That's the part I didn't like about.
There's that contrarian coming back.
Like Game of Thrones, which is separate discussion, but similar idea of like world building. I don't care how the banks work. I don't need you to go into detail about that. So
the
like
downfall of Star Wars.
Yeah, someone like George Saunders.
Is he the chicken guy?
Yeah.
Colonel Saunders?
Colonel Saunders. Who kind of like abstracts out a piece of society to then satirize it without having to like build everything anew. Like enough is there that you recognize the situation that he's satirizing, but it doesn't like you don't have the knock-on ripple effects of like having to set this in our actual real world. So I do like fiction that kind of generalizes to make a broader point, I guess. Does that answer any question that you asked?
No, not at all. I don't. Do you like cartoons? How cartoony do you like your apocalypse?
I mean, I guess that's it. I like the cartoon because I like dense, heavy, smart stuff, but sometimes I just like a, hey, smack in the face, idiots, look at what you're doing.
That does, the dystopia itself opens itself up for the pathos, but also for the humor. And so, when you're defining between the two, what between apocalypse and dystopia, where does that flow into your storyline, your narrative of what you like to write about, what you like to live? The dystopia you are in now, and that we all find ourselves in. Take your time.
Okay. I guess because we're kind of conflating two things in like cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic fiction, and I guess you could argue one might lead to another because is Mad Max cyberpunk?
Well, this
aesthetically it is, but like the premise is, there's no machinery, or there's machinery, there's no robotics, there's no.
Well, I guess it's kind of like steampunky stuff, but like the era of, at least from TV, from movie, Mad Max, Blade Runner. Yeah. Those kinds of things. Yeah. And then at what point does it actually become more computer based? Like I guess Blade Runner's AI, but that feels like a very different AI than Myth of Matrix. Mm-hmm. But all these things are kind of lumped into the same like hot topics kind of like. Well, I'm
going to throw a wrench into all of this.
Okay, good.
By saying I think my interest in this has to do with independence and survival, which like none of this is a commentary on my so refuting John Hodgman in an interview he did 20 years ago with my friend at a paper that no longer exists.
Hot topic.
The entertainment I like doesn't always reflect like the way I wish the world was.
And so hence entertainment.
Yeah, and it's definitely not like my political beliefs, because I do think like societies are stronger when they take care of their weakest members. But my interest in these genres is kind of this renegade loner surviving in a world that's at best indifferent and at worst actively pursuing them. And when I was a young girl, I was really into frontier fiction, which I would posit.
Like the game with the front. What's the game? The video game?
Oh, Oregon Trail. Yeah. Because I think I like the idea of like self-sufficiency and surviving on like, because that's when I play video games like Oregon Trail is not the game.
Oregon Trails?
Oregon Trails, depending on how you play. I do like those like resource games where you have to like gather this to do this and do this and do this. And I think what I like about them is they're like simplistic. There's one thing you gotta get done, and it's to survive.
You're an RPG person.
I am an RPG person.
As am I. And a lot of my RPG, even if it's Grand Theft Auto, I like going around and buying outfits and collecting.
Oh, I don't like that part of the game. Give me the quests, I'll do the quests. Never mind. This is a digital nothing. I'm not going to buy clothes for it.
You don't like, so a sword or a weapon or something is...
No, swords and weapons upgrades.
Because you can
because there's a purpose for it. But
you like destroying things.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think it's like to get psychological and deep. In the real world, I'm trying not to be a destructive person. And that's complicated and hard to do, actually. Because just by existing, I'm taking up resources. I deserve that. I deserve to exist. But I do like acting out this destruction, or seeing destruction acted out, I guess.
So when you put yourself out into the world as a cyber person, into the internets, and you are telling stories, and we are living in a world where people have a hard time telling if you are giving your politics, if you're giving your lifestyle, if you're just telling a story. I know that that's a part of putting yourself out there. Are you an artist? Are you a vlogger? What are you doing with your story? Do I have to believe everything that you are doing?
Yeah.
Everything you're talking about is because you're sad, or because you're angry, or you're destroying something, or you're building something. How do you feel about putting your work into the world in a...
Well, I think there's two things there. One is I make the work, and that it's I'm not in control of how you consume the work, and that's fine by me, because that's a lot of work. It's your responsibility to figure out how it speaks to you, I guess. Death of the author and all that. But the other thing, I think you're kind of touching on the genre gatekeeping that I do think is harmful. I do think, because when we discussed, is cyberpunk a theme we want to talk about, I was hesitant because well, what if we say we're cyberpunk and people say you're not cyberpunk? Because that's what the internet is for, I think, is to tell people how they don't measure up.
And it's funny as it is, part of the joke is we've moved to a city without the intent of, I want to move to Cyberpunk City someday. Even as kids, watching Blade Runner, we didn't actually think at some point when we were in our middle ages, we're going to move to a cyberpunk world.
Yeah.
And yet we moved to a city that then decided that, as an advertising campaign, is going to call it the Cyberpunk City.
Yeah, and as much as I'm like, whatever, it's a fishing village on a series of cliffs. I can order a taxi on my phone and get in and out without paying, and cyberpunk things are happening in my life.
we can have Dijon mustard delivered to our door.
Yeah, not by drone yet, but I bet soon.
Probably. And we were never able to get such.
Well, and the first time our toilet flooded in our first apartment, and we had our boss call up a plumber, and he arrived on a little scooter, and you're like, this is Robert De Niro in Brazil.
Yeah, he had the goggles on and everything, and didn't say anything. Hut, 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 hut. That was in our first few weeks of
then he got arrested for fomenting dissent. No, that's not true. That part's not true.
What are you talking about? You're trying to destroy things again.
No, that's what happens to Robert De Niro in Brazil.
I know. You're breaking things down.
Nothing is real.
And so in your
I guess that's an example of a frustrating thing of I realize we sometimes present things that seem like I'm telling you story time from my real life, and then it's not completely clear when I'm joking that people interpret everything I'm saying as if I'm saying it directly to you, which I'm not. This is a performance, and some of that is okay, get better at performing. But I think there is always that confusion in a certain part of your audience of oh, you're talking about a sad thing, you must be sad. I'm not sad, guys.
Well, there's in any kind
I'm angry.
In any kind of performance, if you are looking at nobody wrote, or maybe some people did and we didn't know about it, wrote John Lennon and say hey, cheer up, buddy, or...
Oh, I bet people did, all the time.
Well, whether he got the notes or not, I suppose, or you didn't have the access to call Jello Biafra and be dude, just chill out. Why are you so angry?
You didn't have a direct pipeline to these people, and you didn't feel entitled to it. So that's another cyberpunk thing.
Once you're putting yourself out, one of the premier things of having video contact with the world is such a cyberpunk. It's a trope. From all the books and the comic books and the movies of people, or the Total Recall or something like that. You can see mistakes in they'll make video phone calls to each other and then look out the window and see the same guy but he's on a phone booth. the concept of like actually like
Oh yeah.
like mistakes that
I
were
had to parse that for a second. Like, oh, okay.
mistakes that just not too many years ago people didn't think all the way through.
The conception of what that technology would actually be like.
Yeah.
Actually, I read an interesting article a while ago from the point of view of a UX designer critiquing
UX is
user experience,
Okay.
usually on websites, but maybe for all, it applies.
She's the tech person.
Critiquing, what's his name? Tony Stark's Jarvis interface. And he, like, his argument was you would never, it looks cool, but, like, it would not be functional or helpful the way that they set it up.
That's just a designer is always
Yeah,
going to be like, this will look cool if it does.
Which is, I mean, there is a cycle of like picturing technology and entertainment influences how the next generation of engineers designs technology and back and forth. Like famously, cell phones from Star Trek,
which they didn't even. Maybe there was some episodes where they had video phones, but like it's silly to think that like, they hadn't actually thought that far into like or texting or sending pictures like of smiley faces and Spock. Yay.
Soccer ball, thumbs up, question face.
Damn it, Jim! Stop it.
Use words. Yeah, McCoy would be like.
He'd hate it.
Emojis are ruining language. Damn it. But also, less famously, because less people actually read it. In David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, he has a whole system where he predicts that people using video phone to call each other, a technology would adapt alongside, which would be physical masks, because people got tired of like staring at each other's faces or like self-conscious about like, I didn't put on any makeup yet. And then you called, and so I'm just going to put this mask on. And then we'll look like I'm attentive. And then I do remember like critiques of the book that came out in the late 90s. At the time were like, well, he got so many things right except this. But now there are those digital filters you can put on your face. You even adjust your eye line. Like, so he wasn't right about how it was enacted, but he knew that part of human psychology would demand that adaptation, which is...
If only he could have lived to see it.
Wow.
So, to sum things up, these are the themes that we're interested most on this channel at whoopwu Studios. And going forward, how we deal with those will be an exciting journey. How we look at the apocalypse. If we actually, are we pre-post apocalypse?
As the apocalypse currently unfolding.
Yeah, and
we'll be here.
That's what we're going to be covering here on the news from whoopwu Studios in Cyberpunk Chongqing. Do you have anything to add to the end before we close up and in broadcast for the evening?
Stay inside.
And
carry on.
And order pizza because
that sounds good.
We can get pizza delivered
from a guy. Use my phone to order up a pizza from a guy in a little blanket.
That's the future. We'll see you then.